We stand all together, united in solidarity with Turkey, and all allies also condemned terrorism in all its forms.
Welcome back. We're talking about the involvement of Turkey in the fight against ISIL. Still with me is Cale Salih in Oxford. She's a visiting fellow to the European Council on Foreign Relations, focusing on the Kurdish people. In the studio with us, Daniel Serwer is a professor in conflict management at Johns Hopkins University. We also have from Ankara, Tulin Daloglu. She is a Turkish journalist and opinion writer, and Joshua Walker is also here in the studio. He's a transatlantic fellow at the German Marshall Fund, a non-partisan U.S. think tank. Well, we just heard Joshua, NATO, united, and yet before we went to the break, Tulin saying that she's not sure that Turkey and the U.S. see eye to eye. I think Daniel's saying the same sort of thing. What do we see? Kind of a muddled mess in some respects?
I mean, we heard that everyone's united against terror. That's very easy. The question is, who are the terrorists? Turkey has defined the PKK as a terrorist organization that is pretty universal, right? I think, as Cale already talked about, the U.S. and European allies agree with this. But what about the PYD? The PYD is associated with the PKK. Therefore, by definition, you would say they're a terrorist organization, but they're fighting against the bad guys. They're fighting against ISIS and ISIL. That's something that we can all agree on. But the level at which Turkey wants to go after the PKK versus ISIL is where we're still murky. And I think if Washington had a game plan, it would be going after ISIL exclusively, whereas Turkey has made it very clear that's not part of their game plan. There needs to be a longer-term plan. There needs to be a plan to remove Assad, and there needs to be a plan to make sure that the PYD cannot create its own entity that would be contiguous with the rest of the Kurdish regions that Turkey has from the beginning been opposed to.
Let me ask you about the vacuum that's created. You remove something, there's always a vacuum, and it seems like there are a lot of bad actors in this region. And you mentioned this yourself, in terms of governance, what happens? I mean, you remove something, but what happens afterwards? I mean, is anyone really giving a lot of thought to this?
I haven't seen any serious thought by the American administration. I think the Kurds give a lot of thought to it, and they would like to unify the separate Kurdish enclaves that are distributed along the southern border of Turkey. I think the Turks have given some thought to it, but they haven't told anybody, so far as I know, what their solution is. My guess is that they might have some favorite Syrian opposition people to inject in there to try to keep that territory so that it separates Kurdish enclaves.
Cale, let me ask you about this. You give a lot of thought to the Kurds, and the Kurds apparently giving a lot of thought to this. Clearly, if the Kurds were to unite and create like their own territory, that's one of the things that Turkey just seems very much opposed to.
Turkey is indeed opposed because they, like I said, they see the PYD as being an offshoot of the PKK. And there is some truth to that. I mean, the U.S. draws this distinction between the PKK and the PYD mostly because it's convenient, because the PYD is fighting ISIS in Syria and is not technically on a terrorist list. However, the PKK is also fighting ISIS in Iraq. And so does it really make sense that we would support, that the U.S. would support the PYD fighting ISIS in Syria, but consider the PKK fighters fighting ISIS in Iraq terrorists, in particular because there are many Turkish Kurdish fighters who trained with the PKK in Iraq and then move on to fight with the YPG in Syria. So the truth is that the lines between these organizations are indeed quite blurred, and Turkey definitely has a point there. But the question is, how do they deal with the de facto reality that the PKK is now a transnational organization? I mean, their best option might be to try and make peace with what the organization has become, which is a transnational movement, rather than try to fight it on three different fronts.
Tulin, let me ask you about the Kurdish population. It's large in Turkey. How is all of this being perceived there? And does the government run a risk of basically engendering some unrest within their own country?
Well, it's all possible. It's very difficult to read what's really happening right now. But the international community is looking at it as, and seeing that Turkey is now cooperating more with the US and the Western allies against the IS. But when you look at it from inside Turkey, you do see a different story. And the story is this. Yes, Turkey is now in an agreement with the US, and at equal time, it started some domestic raids across the country. And according to the recent numbers, they arrested about 1,050 people. Now, the catchy point here is that about 900 of them are PKK members or allegedly PKK members, and only about 137 of them are allegedly IS or ISIL members. And most of the ISIL members have been released, but the majority of the PKK members are being kept, and they're all in the court process right now. So when the Kurdish population is looking at it, they are reading it with a different skepticism. There are different questions there, and they're also questioning whether the Turkish government, the ruling Justice and Development Party, was sincere from get-go about this Kurdish peace process, where they wanted to go. Again, it is very difficult to make any, wise comment or wise analysis on it, because we really do not know what the government told with the PKK. So, there are a lot of controversy. It's really very difficult to write a coherent story about all these different and puzzling and controversial points in this.
Joshua, you've spent time in Turkey, and this political dimension is important, and it also seems rather confusing. Is there a chance that this can backfire on the government, going after two terrorist organizations, so to speak, and then also kind of, engendering some unrest within the country itself?
I think anytime you take on terrorist organizations that are as battle-hardened as both ISIL and PKK, and you do it in the way that we're seeing with the lack of coordination, you have trouble. I would think that having sat on the sidelines for as long as Turkey has, they have been trying to make a Kurdish peace process. It needs to be said that both the PKK and both ISIL hit Turkey first. So Turkey's response, whatever disproportionality you may think about it, they were hit first. They're considered terrorist organizations. Turkey's going after them. So the question now is, what will the international community do? Can the U.S. make kind of all the muddle that we're seeing in this region? Can they help an ally like Turkey kind of figure out the best case solution? And I think the best case solution has already been alluded to by Cale, where she said they need to make peace with their own Kurdish population, which will then engender a larger peace in the area.
How likely is that, though? I mean, how likely is that? This has been going on for some time.
I mean, it's been going on for over 30 years now in terms of the armed conflict. Over 30,000 people are dead. At some point in time, there's going to have to be peace. I think in the Middle East, it's always easy to be pessimistic, but I am cautiously optimistic this time around, given that I think Turkey is putting boots on the ground and the U.S. has gotten itself directly involved with Turkey and the NATO alliance.
Daniel, talk to me about these safe zones. I mean, what do they look like on paper, and how likely are they to actually be put into place, and how difficult?
Well, you can announce a safe zone any place, but they're not safe. They're target-rich environments from the point of view of both the regime and ISIL, so they'll be attacked. The question then becomes, what are you going to do to protect the safe zones? Because they're not safe naturally. And there's been very little clear commitment on that subject. The U.S. is saying no-fly zone. Safe zone could also be attacked by artillery. It could be attacked by infiltration. And I know of no serious plan for protecting a zone in northern Syria that would actually make it safe. I'm very skeptical that a safe zone that isn't a protected zone will in fact work.
Yeah, well, we aren't likely to see that anytime soon, but I want to thank all four of you for this lively discussion. Thanks so much for stopping by the Heat.
Thanks for having us.
That's all we have time for, but the conversation, of course, continues online. Visit our website at cctv-america.com for the latest on the global fight against ISIL, or chat with us on Twitter. We're at cctv_America. I'm Mike Walder in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.